Okay, meeting is now being live streamed. Cool. So I think we should be good. Happy May the 4th day, everyone. Yeah, no. So meeting is being recorded, being live streamed, uploaded to YouTube. We abide by CNCF and Linux Foundation CNCF Code of Conduct, as well as our own tech security Code of Conduct. So I think let's do kind of a quick run through, do some quick updates, and also kind of just go through anyone that's new to introduce yourselves. So let me go through the list. Michael, do you want to give a supply chain update?
Sure. So a couple of small things. One is hopefully the final feedback on the ref arc is now addressed. There were some pretty good ones that kind of came in at near the end there. So I think we're more or less good on there. Obviously, we can't make everybody happy, but at least hopefully we made most folks happy with the content. So that's one thing. The other thing is there's some additional sort of stuff that we're starting to poke around with regards to the proposals. Those are starting to kind of come together. There's more details will be sort of in those meetings, but I think we're also looking to maybe start to partner with some additional CNCF projects to see if we can start, like, how can we get you all the things you need, your SBOM, your secure your supply chain, all that good stuff. And I'm trying to think. Oh, and then the other thing, which is something that was brought up, was there is, I think, kind of some growing open questions about, like, when it comes to prioritization around cloud native security, like what sorts of things make the most sense to secure first rather than second, so on. And it's kind of tied into some of the supply chain stuff that was being discussed, was like, hey, does it make sense to secure the Helm chart over the image first, over the, there's questions like that. But yeah.
That's a interesting thing. So I know we were talking about, this was something that was brought up for the cloud native security map, where they were like, okay, we want to provide, I think we called them trails, to be like, okay, what are you interested in? And obviously everyone has like different priorities within their environment, and to say like, okay, I'm interested in supply chain security, or interested in locking down my infrastructure, and then it kind of guides you into like, okay, here are the things that you should look at. Is it kind of similar to what you're thinking, so, or more like a recommendation thing?
I think a little both. Like, I think there's going to be the cloud native map, and I think also associated with that, talking to the folks from the Cartographos working group, which is kind of trying to take that map and create a journey out of it. And so trying to align, like, yeah, probably the first thing you should be doing is focusing here. And as you get more mature, you could probably focus across the board or whatever. I think there's some questions open there. But I think one of the things that's confused, or not, is somewhat confusing, is like where folks, like, what's the highest priority things to focus on when it comes to security? Like, if I only have, so many, hours in the day, what should I focus on securing? And that includes stuff like supply chain. Like, should I focus on supply chain first before securing this other thing? I think that's kind of where some of those questions are coming from.
So, so shouldn't this apply to the SALSA levels? Like, you first look into what SALSA level 1 is trying to do, right? I mean, that's the progression that I consider. I mean, that's what I am advocating, at least in my work, like look into the things in progression, because you cannot secure everything from day zero.
Yeah. And I think it's also around stuff like, let's say, assuming, it's not just necessarily a project where you're securing, let's say, the supply chain of it, but also, some running infrastructure. Should I focus on the, making the infrastructure secure by default? And then there was also another thing that was being discussed, which was like, hey, even if my application is some Go, some containers and let's say a Helm chart, should I salsify my Helm chart first? Should I salsify my container images first? Should I salsify the Go code first? I think generally, I don't want to go too deep into solution space. I think probably just say, hey, the higher up the chain you can go, the better it usually is. But yeah.
I almost wonder whether this is it depends answer, where you ask them, what's your threat model? And then what threats do you care about? What are you worried about? And then let people figure out their own answers instead of we claiming to know all the answers for everyone.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, I think that there are probably some guidelines we could probably use. Like generally, I think if you were to say, should I salsify like something that ostensibly text, that's probably a little less valuable than, because it's a little easier to just sort of deal with compared to, let's say, hey, like if I were to sort of, throw out suggestions, it would probably be like compiled code tends to be obviously more complicated to understand. So putting, applying salt to that would probably make sense just to start. But yeah, I do agree that at the end of the day, though, there's going to be certain projects where, hey, based on what you're doing, it probably makes sense to do the container first or whatever.
It might make sense as well to work out the assumptions that Salsa needs to live on. For example, is there anything specifically about who's allowed to commit something to a given repository, or who's allowed to, how do you gain access? How are the keys managed? How are they rotated, and so on? Like we say, something has to be signed, and that implies that there's a way to manage those keys, just as an example.
Yep. Oh, go ahead.
I think that well, what Frederick just said was kind of resounds with some of the changes that we're working with Emily on, which is that we don't talk that much about how this ties to organization. A lot of it is like the risk appetite and how does this map.
Yep. So on that end, I do have a to complement your Salsa blog that has just gone out. I have a quick one that should hopefully get the ball rolling there. But I also think it's probably worthwhile. I think one of the problems that has come up has been without, let's say, an example to start with, people aren't really sure how to apply some of those rules. Like, because if you were to ask me today, like, how would I apply risk appetite if I could see, here's a whole broad spectrum of things, I might not know until I start kind of poking around with it a little bit and try and figure that out. And then I think it'll help us figure out, based on these things, it seems like this is a pretty good, reasonable guidelines around, assuming you have a risk appetite that looks like this is how we'd probably suggest you move forward.
Do you see this tying back into some of the work that was initially done by Andy and John around the Kubernetes threat model?
I haven't seen too much of that work, but I do probably assume that the answer is yes, because talked to both Andy and John about a lot of those elements, and the idea was, hey, when it comes to securing supply chain in particular, it was there to fill in a pretty big gap in the Kubernetes security space, which is just like, great, I've secured the network elements, I have a whole bunch of stuff around IAM, I have a service mesh, I'm doing all the right sorts of things. Oh no, I'm running software that was compromised in the first place, and that software is now trusted to do certain things. It was kind of, it could be potentially all for naught. So that's kind of where a lot of that conversation came out of. Definitely try and pull, ping John, ping Andy, see where they might be able to, also highlight some of that.
Yeah, I think this may be dated. I think they presented this like a year and a half ago. So yeah, maybe it's time for V2 then. Awesome. Thanks, Michael. On that note, since Michael mentioned it, my update was on the Salsa S1 blog post. So I'm gonna link it in the chat. This is something that that me and a few others have been working on, basically kind of just trying to get an idea of better understanding what cells are, what is SBOM, what are their purposes independently, but also understanding that there are a lot of overlaps between the two, and there's actually a lot of ways in which salsa practices can help SBOM to be able to generate a more complete SBOM that you can answer questions about supply chain compromise about, as well as just making tooling and adoption in the ecosystem easier. Yeah. So that's my update. Going through the list. Pratik, do you want to give a quick shout out for the controls?
Yes. So reminder everyone, today is the last date for the feedback on the controls working group, or the controls document, which is basically we are having the supply chain, the cloud native white paper and the supply chain white paper document together, along with the mappings to the NIST. And we plan to have a blog post during KubeCon EU to mention that the version 1 of the document is being released as well. So today is the last day for the feedback, in case anyone is interested to add anything to it.
Pratik, can you share the link to the doc?
Yes, I will share it. Yep. Let me find it and I'll drop it in the chat here.
Okay, that's all we have for updates. Do you have any folks that are new to the call? Some of the names don't look as familiar to me. If this is like one of your few times, also feel free to do another introduction. Cool. If not, today's a check-in meeting. So before, usually what ends up is we kind of just work through things within the tag, whether people have questions about the processes, about how to contribute. If not, we usually do some triage as well. So I want to open it up to discussions first. Is there anything that people are thinking about? Any questions? Can be related to projects, project ideas that you have for the tag. Or if you want to just talk about a security topic or something that's kind of problems that you're tackling in the security space, this is the forum for it.
One thing I wanted to just say thanks to everyone who worked on reviewing and contributing to version 2 of the Cloud Native Security White Paper. We finished the RFC period 1 week ago on April 27 now. So thanks a lot for all of you, probably 25 plus people who contributed, reviewed, and also to the giants or who authored the version 1 on whom we are writing the version 2. So thanks a lot for that. Hoping to release that similar to controls catalog around KubeCon EU. Depends on how much bandwidth CNCF folks have on the written content reviews and publication. So just wanted to say that on the record on YouTube so that we don't get, we do, it's not lost anywhere.
And thank you so much, Pushka. You've been doing a great job leading the effort. It was a lot of different things, and a lot of I think the way that you handle like the version 2, especially this is something that we haven't done before. I think that was very good and was like kind of flowed very well.
Yeah, glad it's almost done now. So let's see. Once it's published, I'll be happy. Until then, fingers crossed.
Awesome. Cool. Any other topics before we dive into doing some triage?
I have I guess, a topic related to supply chain security around like patching third-party containers, wondering like how other people deal with this. We've been facing issues internally where we're kind of tied to older versions of like an open source application. But obviously the containers generally aren't patched. One solution that is to obviously rebuild from source. But I've been getting a lot of pushback that introduces like the kind of availability concerns. Just kind of curious how other people have dealt with this problem.
Sure. So I mean, there's a I don't want to take up necessarily too much time, but there's well, some of this is described in the best practices white paper. Some of the elements might just be, you know, you might upset some folks by just saying, no, you got to rebuild. But generally, I think the idea that a lot of areas are starting to go is try and take more of that distroless approach. So you have a minimal set of things in your container so that when you are patching or building on top of a container, right, you're building on top. Is it that it's by container, you're talking about container images or the running
Container
container?
images.
Okay, cool. So a lot of stuff there is then, hey, take that container image, rebase, rebase stuff on top of it, patched versions of things and so on. But I think that can become in its own way, it can get very complicated depending on stuff like if you're, I think we very much highly in the paper and the best practices highly recommend that folks sort of try not to just, let's say, use like the Ubuntu image for what they're running. Try and use something like a distroless way of doing it, whether it's a build packs or NixOS or distroless itself, AppCo, etc. And the reason being is the less stuff you have in the image, the less stuff you have to patch. And I recognize that might not be for everybody, but like if you could start transitioning there, it makes it easier. But until then, you can sort of say, hey, I have an image. Great. There's some tools that are starting to come out that allow you to sort of rebase those layers. So you could just essentially just say, hey, I'm rebasing a new version of this thing that needs to get patched on top. But once again, that kind of comes with its own set of complications.
Yeah. Are any of those tools kind of, I guess, reliable, or are they still in very early stages?
Good question. Some of them, like the Nix and NixOS stuff, has been around for years, but you have to then follow the NixOS sort of ecosystem, and so that's probably not the best for most folks. Some of the other ones that are out there, I do think are a little bit earlier on. Some folks might have some additional thoughts on that.
Are you talking about rebasing solutions?
I guess the like alternative that gets proposed to me the most is from like building from source is just like pulling the third-party image and then just, if it's like based on Ubuntu, just doing like from image and then doing like apt-get upgrade on that image, which has its own problems. Just wondering if there's alternatives people have between like doing that and rebuilding from source.
Is there a possibility to work with the authors of the image you're using and helping them patch it upstream so that you can pull those?
Yeah, I guess that's another option.
Yeah, one thing to add on there is it's often good practice to sort of, if the issue is you need to patch some, let's say, software that got built from source, often it is better to sort of separate out like the step that builds the code. So let's say you're building a Java application or something like that from the thing that builds the image, because then building the image, you just sort of say, great, I just take whatever the latest jar, war, ear file, or whatever binary, layer it on top of the image. So that's like a common path that a lot of folks take. So it's like you still have the binary, you can still pull the binary from other places and do whatever you need to do. But as opposed to it being like, let's say, encoded into like a Docker file itself, or, the Docker file says, oh, install all these dependencies, now compile my source and then store everything all in the same image. Often that can, introduce some of those issues as well.
Okay, you're saying basically separate out the build step into a separate container and pull that piece in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sure. What are the concerns shared regarding rebuilding? I mean, that seems to be a straightforward solution.
Some of the concerns were just like the toil of doing it, of like maintaining tooling to actually do that internally. Some other engineers were raising a lot of concerns that those projects might not have like their dependencies pinned, or they might not be following best practice. So by rebuilding, you're introducing new library versions, and we wouldn't be experts in that application to test to make sure that it's not introducing bugs.
I see. Yeah, so with that, that's where I think that kind of comes into play, where we would almost recommend separating out the building of the thing. And then so that if you do build, let's say, open, you're building an open source tool from source, then pulling it in, and then you don't want to rebuild that open source tool, you want to just patch a different thing. The recommendation there is, like build whatever that binary looks like, push it into an artifact repository, whatever, and then compile all that into an image, because then you can just, great, I just, X needs to be updated, but not Y. Great, we'll update X, and then we'll pull those things back into the Docker image. The other thing too is this is one of the things that introduces a lot of issues with if you are using Docker files. One of the things is just as time goes on, a lot of folks are pushing away from at least Docker files on their own because of all the sorts of temporal issues it brings in, because if you haven't pinned everything, if you haven't done all these things, you're pulling in all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I've found it really challenging because I operate in a like highly regulated environment, and like vulnerabilities is like a massive issue, and my team look after like the Kubernetes clusters and run like 40 containers, so trying to maintain all of those at scale is like quite complicated. Good. Yeah, thanks for the input.
Yeah, I think unfortunately the way containers are built it's difficult to do that.
Yeah. No, it's nice to get another perspective on it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that this kind of also is related to, I think, another problem that Arnett was bringing up a couple months back, that I'm depending on this thing, and that thing depends on something that has a CVE that needs to be patched. So like, they need to go multiple levels in order to get this thing patched. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, another option is available. You can also, like, depending upon your technology stack, you can build a native binary for your app, right? Like, so then you will have less dependency on your base image or the whatever image you are using, right? So
yeah, I guess, building the binary if it's an option, and using like an internal base image gives us a lot more control over the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things that I know, it's one of the things that we've talked about as a next step potentially for the supply chain stuff is maybe taking a use case like yours. Generically, you don't have to go into too many details if it's confidential or anything like that, but it would be really interesting to like sort of see like almost like a case study, like, hey, this is where you are today. How would you get more towards what good software supply chain looks like? What are the sort of intermediary steps? Because as you mentioned, like, you're not going to be changing everything tomorrow. So what sorts of things can you change today to make it, to get the highest ROI, and then potentially while still paving the path that, in a few months, in a few years, you could get to that much better, area where you're following all the best practices.
Yeah, I think like part of it is kind of taking a look, kind of evaluating the risk, supply chain risk with kind of some of your dependencies. So it's like an image built by some random developer is obviously going to be higher risk than the images published by Kubernetes. So that's kind of how I've approached it, like starting off. It's also about trying to get buy-in from engineers that this is an actual problem. You kind of, I guess what this group has done with the documenting the breaches, the past breaches, helps with that. Yeah, I haven't quite figured it out yet.
Some companies follow certified base image, right? Like the developers in that company only allowed to use that certified base image. They won't be allowed to use any other images unless if it is like a completely proprietary software which need to be run. Even they may try to rebuild that internally, right? So there are several other controls you can consider. I mean, you can't completely trust any images available in Docker Hub or any other image, right? It can contain anything. So just be cautious with that.
Yeah, no. Yeah, like for the in-house developed applications, it's a lot easier. Where I found it most challenging is for the third-party, like, or open source applications that you use to kind of operate a cluster, or like provide tooling in your environment.
Kevin, another perspective, assuming like this is not an easy problem to solve and you'll have to struggle with it for a while, is just accept that the risk profile of externally sourced images is going to be worse than something that you're building in-house, and just planning your deployments in such a way that you don't trust the applications that are coming from an external image the same way you are trusting an in-house inbuilt application. So that way you can define like deployment topologies and define network boundaries such that they don't interact a lot, and then the risk automatically is kind of managed in a way where the trusted ones are in one place and non-trusted ones have other controls and are in a separate space.
Yeah, that makes sense if possible.
That's a good discussion. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I'm gonna do some quick triage. All right. So,
Brandon, on the topic of triage and related to the point you mentioned about the one dependency depending on another one and then that depending on something else, there is an open PR related to that, which might be worth like highlighting while we're triaging,
this one.
which is, yeah, that one, correct. So anyone wants to take a look and give feedback, I think it is a good place to give some guidance that maybe is useful across CNCF.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like this has gone through one review.
Yeah, I think INET hasn't resolved the comments, even though he has finished implementing the fixes. So that's why it feels like incomplete.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, that's if someone can help review this, I think we should be good. And then we can get this merged in. This is a good document, and we should convert this to a blog post as well.
Yeah, agree.
Awesome. So this is 887. I'm just gonna put it in the chat. Oh, you already did. Thank you. Okay. So I'm gonna go through it as it comes by and whatever I see on my page. If anyone has a particular issue that they want to kind of bring up the queue for triage because you think it's interesting, or you can shamelessly plug your own issues, put it in the chat, and someone let me know if there's something in the chat so I'm not looking at that screen right now. So KubeWarden policy engine for Kubernetes, I believe that this is a project that is applying for Sandbox. KubeWarden, dynamic admission controller that leverages WebAssembly to write policies. Yay, one more policy engine. Okay. Yeah, so I think this one Emily has messaged me about it in TOC channel that this is important. So let's try and schedule something here. 25th. What is this? June 1st. Oh, okay. June 1st on there. We have the IBOM presentation. So let's do June 8th. Let's try and target this. I'll keep watering.
I think yesterday I was reading this blog. They added support for signing with Sigstore also. You can sign the policies with Sigstore and then they honor those policies before applying.
That's cool. Yeah, I think this is kind of similar to what like Envoy does, right? Except now it's a generic.
I think it's similar to Kyverno, I think.
Okay. Oh, okay, yeah. I was thinking about the WebAssembly part of it. So June 8th. Does anyone want to be a tech rep for this? I can just put my name down as a presentation. Doesn't really matter. Let's just get that out of the way. Cool. IBOM, this one I think has been scheduled. Availability. Oh, okay. All right. Maybe gonna see what the let's Pushkar, you want to take it up? If not, I will tag others to be a rep for this.
This is for IBOM, right?
IBOM,
And
yeah.
okay, and for as a stag sorry, as a stag rep, I just have to help out on the presentation and be maybe the facilitator for that day.
Yeah, or at least dedicate a facilitator for the day.
Got it. Okay, we're saying
Did you
June
want to take it?
1st. Yeah, June 1st should be fine. Assign to me for now. I'll let you all know if something happens. And
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the responsibility is just like making sure that speaker is aware of it and making sure there's someone there to facilitate. So
okay, yeah, go for it. Good to be able to interact closely with John as a result of this.
Flux. What is Flux CD? CNCF incubation. So are they going for graduation? Oh, interesting. Okay. So they're going for graduation. So the question is, okay. Security PALS program. It looks like Emily's recommending this for Security PALS program. Okay, I think this is something we have to discuss on the figuring out, because I think Security PALS is more for like earlier projects. This seems like a fairly fleshed out project already. And if it's going for graduation, then it should have security figured out. Okay, I think this is a to-do that Putra, can you do me a favor and add this issue to our TL TL discussion notes?
Yes. Can you share the link
Yeah.
on the chat?
Yeah. 1 second. Oops, wrong window. Oh no. Okay, there we go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Roadmap for SBOM. This one we talked about last time. Looks like a bunch of comments here. I believe the next step for this is to create a timeline, project timeline. Yeah, deliverable scope, project schedule, and define leads. Okay. Steps here.
So should we create, is that going to be like, should I create the timeline and everything, deliver what I think the timeline deliverable should be, or should that be like a discussion with the group? How does that work?
So usually, as a project lead, which I'm assuming you're volunteering yourself here, you would create a first draft of this, and then you would discuss it with the stack representative, just to get initial feedback before sharing it out, just to make sure we don't overcommit on resources, or like maybe we need to stretch the timeline a bit more because there's like KubeCon and stuff like that. Yeah, so if you can come up with this, like the scope deliverables, project schedule, and project members, kind of a list of that. I think we have to get stack wrap here. I think for now, I can put my name down since I've been involved with the supply chain working group. Then we can revisit that again.
Sounds good.
So I'm gonna just write it down so we don't need to fill in details and discuss project. Developers project. Set rep default. Awesome. Application build monitors and testers. This one needs a bit more time. Looks like there's not
Yeah.
that many comments on that yet.
Yeah, I think we discussed. I'll probably sync up with Michael and present it to the SSF working group. I missed, I think, today also. So maybe hopefully in next couple of weeks I will present it there.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good. I will assign you to this one. Thank you, Shripad. Yeah, I gotta skip on this. This is not really important. Applies. Okay, this one is the one that Michael proposed. This one needs more time. Needs more interest. So it's just gonna leave it as it is. Provide guidance on starting a region-specific group. Okay, yeah, so we had the APAC, a bit of context, we had the APAC, we closed the APAC because the few people that were kind of like main members of it and like driving the discussions all got busy. But I think we want to have something like that in the future. I think this is probably like a good first issue as well. So it's a good first issue, governance, help wanted. Yeah. Drop the triage table. And looks like CNCF has commented on that. This is what's happened. All right, March 30th. Oh, this one was interesting. Did we not make headway on this one?
I think this was one of the first few issues we thought could be a blog post, right?
Yeah. Remember, I think this was the stack wrap was gonna be Ash or so. Remember,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just gonna look at Ash. Okay.
Hey, Brandon, just checking, we don't have to. But I think check-in meetings we kind of promised will be a bit shorter than usual. So
Oh yeah. Okay.
should we finish like 10 minutes before the hour?
All right, I'm all for that. I have no problems making shorter
I thought
meetings.
you would
So,
like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I'm yeah, it's not I totally forgot. I just like lost track of time because I just
No
looked at my
worries.
screen.
That's why the scribes exist.
Cool. Thanks everyone. Any parting words? We won't see each other for the next couple of weeks. So hopefully we see all of you at KubeCon. Cool. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Pushka, for keeping me honest.